I was folding linen when my son told me I no longer had a home. The white sheets lay in careful squares on the arm of the sofa. Sunlight lit the tiles in the foyer with a glow I have never been able to describe, a color between honey and sand. That was when Rayan stood in the doorway, keys biting into his palm, and said, "Ma, listen. Things will be smoother if you don't come to the villa anymore." He didn't meet my eyes. He looked at the bowl of lemons on the table, at the frayed edge of the rug, at anything that wasn't my face. "I see," I said, still folding. "Smoother for whom?" "For everyone," he said, relief arriving early in his voice, as if I had already agreed. "It'll be theirs now. Lena's family will move in next month." "It makes sense. Her parents are getting older," and he swallowed. "It's our gift." Yeah. He said it like a ribbon had been tied around it. Like his father hadn't built it hand by hand when money had to be stretched like dough. He said it like I hadn't planted the bougainvillea that climbed the archway and bled fuchsia into every summer we lived through. He said it like a boy who had forgotten the price of the first door he ever walked through. "You are not allowed to come," he added, and finally looked at me. I folded the last pillowcase. The cotton was soft from years of washing, the kind of softness only time can make. "I understand," I said, and I smiled. Then I nodded, like someone who agrees to rain from a cloud. He waited for me to rise like a storm. I didn't. In the silence, the villa rose up in my mind. The blue shutters, the terrace where my husband Omar and I had counted the seasons by the stubbornness of a fig tree. The mosaic fountain that never learned to keep its singing to itself. He waited for my anger and found only white linen and a woman who learned long ago to hide her battles where no one could take them from her. He exhaled, and he touched my shoulder with the thoughtless tenderness of a person who believes kindness can bleach out what came before, and left the room with the air of a decision settling into its chair. After he closed the door, I went to the window and watched a boat draw a bright line across the dull afternoon sea. I put the folded linen in the cedar chest, shut the lid, and laid my hand on the polished wood the way you lay your hand on a friend's shoulder. Then I took out a notebook and wrote one line: "He gave what he didn't own." Then beneath it, I wrote the date and drew a small lemon in the corner, the way I always do when I am about to do something that requires both gentleness and teeth. I didn't call anyone. I made tea. I ate a small apricot and let the stone sit heavy and honest in my hand. And then I went to the old metal box in my bedroom, the one that still smelled faintly of camphor and my mother's warnings, and took out the envelope Omar and I signed 12 years ago at a square wooden table in a stranger's office. The envelope was labeled in my handwriting. If I'm ever afraid, it contained 3 things: a copy of our deed, a letter from a woman named Aisha, and a photograph of Omar standing in front of the stairs with wet cement on his boots and such a grin on his face, you could have warmed your hands on it. When we first finished the Villasea glass house, we called it because the children used to collect glass. The sea had softened and bring it to me in their small, wet hands, Omar said. Stone is a jealous thing. It believes it belongs to whoever touches it last. He insisted we see Aisha, a lawyer who spoke in clean sentences. She set up what she called a house that outlives storms. A trust with a stubborn backbone. My use for life could not be scourged by anyone else's signature. Title could not be slid around the table like an extra piece of bread. "I'm old-fashioned in this way," she had said then, smiling not with her mouth but with her eyebrows. "People become foolish around houses. This will keep your house the way it deserves, simple on paper and hard to steal." Omar died 5 years later in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and fear, and I would have burnt the villa down if I thought grief would be any colder in ash. Instead, I watered the bougainvillea and made a habit of sitting on the floor where the winter sun warmed the tiles. And I kept the envelope where my courage could reach for it with one hand in the dark. I called Aisha now and listened to the line ring in the old way. She answered and said my name before she said hello. "I think we're due for tea," I said. "I'll bring the good biscuits," said. And 30 minutes later, she was at my door with a pastry box and that look. She has the one that balances its weight carefully between concern and amusement. I told her what Rayan said. I told her how I smiled and nodded. "You have always frightened me a little when you smile quietly," she said. It's never good news for the person you're smiling at. We took the papers out of their envelope. The trust was not yet old enough to creak, and I had never stopped paying the quiet, boring bills that keep a house civilized. Aisha confirmed what I already knew but needed to hear in her voice. The villa's title was held by the trust, whose trustee was not my son, nor his wife, nor anyone who had swapped their heart for a ladle and promised to serve it out to family. When asked, I was the settler and the life beneficiary. Upon my death, the house would become the headquarters for the Arts Fund. Omar and I had written on a napkin one spring evening when we believed the world could be persuaded by stories to behave itself. Could he have believed he could move them in? She asked, thumbing through the documents. If he had stamped himself with enough certainty, belief is cheaper than paper, I said. He bought it wholesale from people who don't pay for things cleanly. She winced the way people do when they love you enough to let you see that your words make them hurt. You want to call him? She said, and it wasn't a suggestion. I want to do something kinder, I said. I want to show him that some doors don't budge for sons no matter how hard they push. Aisha nodded. Then we do this properly. We do not scold. We do not accuse. We build the thing that makes his sentence change shape in his own mouth. Shh. Made a list I didn't watch her make. It's notices to the builder who had been whispering in Lena's father's ear about managing a substantial property. Letters to the bank to confirm no one had attempted to place a second mortgage where number mortgage could go. A courteous invitation to the wife's family to attend a small luncheon at the villa on the date they had chosen to arrive with their trucks. People speak their worst ideas in polite rooms, Aisha said. Hearing themselves may save you. The trouble of repeating them to a judge. What should I bring? I asked. Lemon tea, she said, and a calm that belongs to someone who has read every letter and knows where each one sits. When she left, I took a basket and walked. The little market that grows like a miracle under the fig tree at the end of the lane. The fishmonger shouted. The florist shrugged an apology for wilting tulips. And the man who sells preserved lemons let me choose with my fingers like he always does. I bought a loaf of bread. I bought nothing else I didn't need. On my way home, I stopped and looked at the villa from the street. Pale walls lit by late afternoon, shutters open like blinks. See glass house. Halfway down the path, I stopped. I could hear Omar, as clearly as if he had been standing next to me, say, "You cannot keep a house with your hands, Salma. You keep it with your rules." What? The next morning, I called a carpenter. His name was Idris, and his work was patient. The way the sea is patient when it turns bottles into something a child can hold. I told him what I wanted. He listened like a thoughtful doctor listens to a symptom. 2 days, he said. If you don't mind the noise. The noise, when it came, felt like a shield being hammered into place around me. He replaced the latch on the garden gate with an old-fashioned key that required a little ceremony. He installed small brass numbers beside the door. Omar always said a house shows its dignity when its numbers are honest. He repaired the mosaic where a blue tile had cracked the winter before. And he built me a long, welcoming table that fit under the pergola like it had been grown there while he worked. I moved through rooms with a basket and a mind that refused to become a fist. I took down photographs and wrapped them in brown paper and wrote in pencil on the outside, "Wedding, summer 1999. First day of school, Omar and the cement." I did not hide silver or take knives from the drawer. I moved only what love would cry for if it broke. On the second day, while Idris sanded the edges of the table so that no one would leave with a splinter, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote invitations. They were not printed on thick paper. They did not use cursive to look like something they weren't. They were simple. A date, a time, a note about lemon tea. I addressed them to Lena's parents and brother, to the great aunt, who always smelled like rose water and criticism, to the builder who had spoken too loudly at a wedding last month and mentioned wistfully what a waste an old widow's villa was, and to Rayan and Lena. I wanted them all there. I wanted them to see it, that a house has a spine, and sometimes the spine belongs to the woman everyone thinks is too soft to stand. I dropped the invitations at the post office with hands that did not shake. Then I went home, retied the bougainvillea. where the wind had loosened it, and spent an hour labeling jars in the pantry because I have learned that order is armor when you cannot carry a sword. That evening, Lena called. "A lunch?" she said in that voice that tries to be sweet, so it won't be accused later of being anything else. How thoughtful. "I'd like to welcome your family," I said. "It's a big transition. I'm glad you're taking it well," she said, and let the sentence hang as if it had an unspoken guest holding its hand. "I was worried you'd be difficult." "I've always been difficult," I said, and she laughed because she thought it was a joke. After we hung up, I walked through rooms that remember the downstairs bedroom where my mother had slept for 3 months when her heart didn't know how to be a heart anymore. The upstairs room where Rayan had painted the walls navy when he was 15 and required a horizon to keep his thoughts from tumbling out of him in the wrong direction. The bathroom where the tile was imperfect in one corner because Omar had decided he could do it himself and proved that people can both be wrong and beloved at the same time. I slept in my own bed that night because I refused to let dread be the last thing to touch my pillow. In the morning, Aisha arrived with papers. That smelled terrible and saved lives. She placed a copy of the trust on the kitchen counter next to the lemon bars I had cut too big because I have never learned to portion sweetness sensibly. She braced her palms there and looked at me like you look at a friend when you are about to tell them the truth they asked for. "They will try," she said. "They will tell you that family is everything and mean that your house is." "I will tell them that a promise is everything," I said, "and mean that mine is to Omar and to myself." At noon, trucks began to prowl the street like animals that weren't sure where to establish their territory. A van with a magnet on the side that read Mirza Movers, family-owned, a sedan I recognized as Lena's brother's, a white SUV with windows so dark you could have used them to powder your face. I had set the table under the pergola with plates that didn't match because I have never believed that matching plates make a meal taste better. 2 pitchers of lemon tea sweated gently in the shade. Idris had finished sanding and had left with his tools, held like a soldier's rifle and a smile that knew something was coming that he didn't need to see. Lena's mother arrived first, in a dress that was the color of pear flesh and the shape of a decision. "What a pity to have all this and live here alone," she said, without a hello. "I have never been alone," I said, and poured her tea. She blinked. Lena arrived then, in white, and kissed the air near my cheek. "So generous," she said, glancing around as if my generosity could be found in the corners. Rayan trailed behind her, 2 steps back like a bodyguard for an idea, and would not meet my eyes. Lena's father came last, with his mouth arranged in a smile like a tie clip. The builder was with him, pretending he had taken a wrong turn, and ended up in our garden by mistake. They brought their hunger with them like a weapon they couldn't use because there were napkins on the table, please, I said, and gestured to the chairs. We ate. We made a performance of tasting and nodding. Lena's mother used her fork like an argument. Lena's brother checked his phone under the tablecloth, with the furtive joy of a teenager doing exactly what he had promised he wouldn't. Rayan kept tapping his glass as if it were a pocket watch, and he could make time behave if he found the right angle. When the plates were cleared and the quiet you get when people are ready to talk, sat down at the table. I placed a single sheet of paper beside my plate and slid it toward the center. "This is a letter," I said, "from the trust that owns this house." Lena's father didn't touch it. People who believe in force never touch paper first. They think paper can be made to surrender by waiting it out. Aisha, who had been resting in the living room like a cat, came to the pergola and sat in the chair I had saved. She put a pair of reading glasses on with a modest little click that I've come to associate with significant weather. She read the first paragraph out loud. It said simply, and in the kind of words that lawyers collect the way my children used to collect sea glass, that the house belonged to the trust, that I was the trust's lifetime beneficiary, and that no one could inhabit, mortgage, transfer, gift, lend, or otherwise announce the house as theirs without the trustees' express consent. Asterisk, asterisk. Lena's mother made the tight noise of someone discovering a stain when guests are due. "We are family," she said. "We are grateful for that." Aisha said, "Family is why you are here, and paper is why you are leaving with clarity." Lena stood up. Her chair didn't scrape, because I had put felt on the legs long ago, for exactly that reason, Rehan said. Rehan said something that felt like a shortcut, I said. Shortcuts are little lies that sound like kindness if you don't. Listen carefully. Rehan finally looked at me. The boy I had steered across streets and away from dogs that barked too aggressively. He spoke to the table, not to my face. "Ma, this is ridiculous. It's all ours anyway. What is the point of this dance?" "The point," I said, "is that houses have rules. You must learn them the way you learned how not to run into traffic when you were small." Lena's father smiled his tie-clip smile. "We can work this out like grown-ups," he said. "No need for theatrics." I slid a second sheet toward him, a letter informing them that any attempted occupation without the trustees' consent would be unlawful, and that a court had been informed of a potential attempt. The ink on the judge's signature was the sort of black that refuses to be forgiven. "You've involved the courts?" he asked, as if I had sent an invitation to the wrong cousin. "They are very experienced with paper," I said. He laughed, "which is what men do when they discover power isn't in the room they thought it would be." "What is the surprise then?" he said mildly, and I realized my mouth had been careless enough to smile with my eyes. "Oh," I said, "that will be later." At 3, as if the hour had decided to participate in the story the way people do when they realize they were always characters and never the audience, a small bus turned into the lane and stopped short of the gates. The door folded open, and half a dozen women stepped down with tote bags, practical shoes, and that particular combination of seriousness and delight that belongs to teachers, who have carried their own chairs to start a classroom where none was scheduled. Aisha answered the way a person answers a question she has filed under already handled. "You are welcome to seek relief," she said, "but you will find that the trust is stubborn. The court is disinterested in your indignation, and the headlines are unfriendly to families who try to empty an old woman into the street." He flinched. "People like him hate headlines more than they hate losing. Losing can be explained to themselves. Headlines have to be explained to other people. Eat," I told them, because the afternoon had grown long and manners are a muscle. You have to exercise even when you are winning, or go. Those are the choices they didn't eat. Lena stood slowly, as if any sudden movement might be interpreted as defeat. She touched Rand's wrist. "Let's go," she said. "We'll talk." He didn't move. I looked at my son then, and let the silence do nothing for us. "Walk with me," I said to him finally, and he came. Because some requests are ropes you don't know are around your waist until they tug. We walked to the bougainvillea archway. I touched the thorn that always grows one leaf length from the blossom, and then drew my hand back unbolt. "This house," I said, "was built when we had less than the right to build it. Your father would come home with cement dust in the line where his hair grew and call it snow because he wanted to make our poverty sound like weather." I looked at him. "Don't say this to guilt you. I say it because you have told yourself. A story where generosity is easy. You gave something that was not yours. That is not generosity. That is theft dressed in wedding clothes." He winced and finally met my eyes in full. There he was. The boy who had cried when we lost Aunt Mariam's cat and had written her a letter of apology, as if a child could be responsible for the wanderings of a creature that lived by its own laws. "Lena's father," he began, "is a man who knows how to make people feel small at the dinner table I've finished for him. But you are not small. You say you did this for peace. What peace? The kind that costs only someone else's breath? If you cannot pay with your own, do not buy it." He rubbed his thumb hard against his fingers the way he did when he was 6 and wanted to rub a mistake away. "I was trying to belong somewhere." "You belong here," I said, and the words surprised me by arriving intact, but not as a thief, as a son. We stood and let 5 years of not saying the right thing sit with us like a third person. "You could have told me," he said, eyes dropping to the gravel, "about the trust, the rules." "I shouldn't have had to," I said, not cruelly, There are rules you can only learn by not breaking them. He nodded, which is what people do when they discover the answer they came for is heavy but not sharp. On the patio, the women were laying out notebooks and pen cases. One of them lifted, her face to the sun like a person who has been inside too long. Lena's family had gathered by the gate to speak in the way people speak when they are choosing a story to take home, so it will make them feel tall again. Come have tea, I told Rayan. Then you go. Not because I am petty, though. I can. B. Because you need to understand that there are doors that do not open because you are someone's son, but because you are someone worthy. He came and sat. He held the cup the way people hold apologies. He drank, lips pressed to sugar like a child who cannot yet take bitterness without explanation. When he left, he turned back and looked at me like he was going to say something, and then didn't, choosing instead to save his mouth for when he could trust it. They all left. The movers lifted their shoulders and then lowered them. The gate closed with its new ceremonial click. The women from the cooperative clapped politely. In that way, writers clap for rooms that will be kind to them. A light wind took the scent of lemon into the bougainvillea, and I felt how a house can be pleased with you. If you put your ear close to its heart and listen for the right sounds in the days that followed, quiet things happened that change life the way a river changes its path by changing the shape of the rocks. A mailbox that had been a mouth for bills became a mouth for envelopes, with kind letters inside. Neighbors stopped me to say the word brave, like they were tasting it for the first time. A reporter called Aisha and asked a question about elder housing that did not make me feel like a victim in a story where a clever woman saves me with a trick. My bed felt wider, even though it was not. I slept better, but not longer, because justice is a cup of coffee. It keeps you awake for reasons that are both practical and poetic. On the fourth day, Lena came without rayon. She wore a dress that had been cut by someone who wanted to sell fabric, and a face that had been cut by someone who could not admit their own ambition had teeth. She stood on the path and did not cross the threshold because the new latch maid entering a small prayer. "May I come in?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "because there are ways to be generous that do not require you to give anything away." She sat on the edge of a chair as if the chair could decide whether to accept her. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. The last word stumbled out like a child who hadn't tied its shoelace. "For what?" I asked, because apologies that don't say their own names are invitations to perform. "Forgiveness for someone else's comfort." "For how I spoke," she said after a pause. "For thinking," she lifted a hand and let it fall. "For thinking it would be easy." "I accept the part you mean," I said. "The rest will have to be forgiven by time or not at all." She exhaled an underfurnished breath. "Father," she began, and stopped because, even in her own mouth, it felt like a tired root. She shook her head. "No, me. I wanted a house." "I didn't think you did think," I said, not unkindly. "You thought the way you were taught. To think that houses are prizes you are owed because you learned how to stand near men who think similarly. That women who are old are furniture. That motherhood is an obligation you pay with property." I sipped tea so she would not have to watch me. "Watch her learning. You have a good mind," I said. "Use it for building, not collecting." She nodded, and it was almost beautiful, the way humility looked on her before vanity remembered the face it preferred to make. She stood. "Can I bring you anything?" she asked. "For the program pens," I said. "Everybody thinks of bread but forgets pens." Rayan called that evening and asked if he could come by in the morning. When he arrived, he had a kind of rain in his eyes I recognized. He stood where the hard tile meets the rug and looked at the threshold as if it could explain his own. I told them no, said. "I suspected," I said. He put his hands in his pockets and took them out again like he didn't know what hands were for. I told Lena's father I had been an idiot, told him the house wasn't mine to give, that I didn't want to be the kind of man who believes his mother is a week passed. Then another news travels in spiral shells sometimes. You have to hold it to your ear and wait for it to be the sound you were told it would be. People stopped telling Lena's family what they wanted to hear and started telling them what they needed to learn. That property is not a favor you extract from the elderly with politeness sharpened into pressure. That sons can become men in a day when the right line won't move. A letter arrived from the builder that did not include the word regret, but carried its smell. A text arrived from an unknown number. You didn't have to humiliate us. I looked at the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. Humiliation is what happens when pride discovers a mirror it didn't choose. One afternoon, I walked to the market and the fishmonger said, "You are a hero." And I said, "I am a woman with a stubborn pen." And he laughed and gave me a slice of lemon for free because he is sentimental about people who refuse to be stories other people write for them. That evening, after the sky had finished being pink, Rayan sat with me on the steps and told me something I had not expected to. Here because I had not allowed myself to expect anything at all. I spoke to Aisha about the trust, he said. I want to help build the foundation, the arts cooperative. To make sure he searched for a word and chose one I have loved since I first learned how to wrap cloth around my hair. Useful, useful, I repeated. That would please Omar. He shrugged the way men shrugged when they don't trust compliments to keep their proper proportion. I also asked her if there was a way for me to put my name on something I earn, he said quickly, flushing. Something. That's mine because I make it mine, not because you. He waved a hand at my life, my lemon trees, my receipts. You know? I reached over and took his hand. Build a shelf, I said. Hold books that people will borrow. Fix a bench. Teach a boy to fix a bench. That is how you put your name on a house without writing it on the deed. He laughed, and it was the kind that loosens. The next morning, Lena came again, this time with a box of pens so large it could have supplied a small school for a year. She handed it to me with both hands, and when I took it, she said quietly, "I'm sorry," and didn't elaborate. It was better. We were in the courtyard that Sunday when the surprise I had prepared revealed its second, quieter part. It was not for Lena's family, though I suspect it reached them in the way rain reaches, places you hope it won't. It was for the women who sat at the table. For Rayan, who hammered a nail without announcing that he had hammered a nail. For me, a volunteer from the city library came with a handcart and 3 boxes of donated books. Poetry whose spines were softened by other people's tears. Novels that smelled like attics and afternoons off. Plays that begged to be read with. Too much feeling. We unpacked them and placed them on the new shelf Rayan had built against the garden wall. On the top shelf, we put a small sign in Omar's handwriting. I had traced it from an old postcard. Take what you need. Bring it back when you've learned the ending. He'd written it about tools once. Pleased me to rescue it and let it learn a second life as we stood around the shelf. Lena's mother appeared at the gate, dressed in remorse and an embroidered scarf. She did not enter. She stood with her fingers curled around the iron as if it could keep her stable. "You made a library," she said, the disbelief carrying only half the contempt it would have worn 2 weeks ago. "A small one," I said. "And after," she gestured vaguely, unwilling to say, "after you're gone in front of all these witnesses, this will be for the public." "For whoever the house chooses," I said. "Houses know." She looked at Rayan. He looked back. Open in a way that men are not taught to be if they want to keep their fathers happy. She nodded once. A motion that could have been mistaken for a flinch. Then she left, and I didn't know whether she went home or to a shop where the air would feel more like the person she had chosen to be. Weeks turned into something gentler than weeks. I remembered how to bake without expecting someone to show up and claim the bread was theirs to distribute. The cooperative wrote lines I know will live longer than the people who wrote them. Rayan changed his password to something he would have once mocked himself for choosing. And Lena learned how to come to a house that did not belong to her and leave with something anyway. On an afternoon that smelled like oranges and in dove summer, Aisha and I sat on the steps and watched the light pull itself taller before it fell. "When he said those words to you," she said, "after we had chewed without speaking for a while, the ones about not being allowed to come, did you feel afraid?" "I felt old," I said honestly, and then I felt my age leave me alone. And what stayed was something I remembered from being 20 and poor, the taste of a fight I knew how to win. She smiled, and I loved her for being proud, but also for knowing pride is dangerous if you don't let it breathe properly. You were kind, she said. Not all revenge has to be unkind. It wasn't revenge, I said, and then I grinned. Because we both knew we were teasing the word into behaving. It was a surprise for the house. At night, sometimes I wake and listen. Houses talk to people who deserve it. The pipes settle like old men making thoughtful noises. A fig tree drops a fruit that lands with the small thud of a sentence well placed. On those nights, I walk to the bougainvillea, touch one thorn, and think of Omar's boots, Brayon's boy shadow on the wall, of Lena's box of pens, of a gate that needs ceremony to open. And I think, yes, this is how you keep a house. With paper, with patience, with lemon tea, with surprises that fit the hearts that need them. When Lena's family finally moved into the new apartment they had taken a lease Anna, decent place with an elevator that hiccups twice between floors, they sent a message that said simply, "We are settled," I replied. "I hope it becomes a home." We did not say more. The line between politeness and peace is narrow. We walked it like tightrope walkers in sensible shoes. On the evening of the last reading of the season, the courtyard filled with chairs that didn't match, with knees that had carried bodies through choices, with laughter that sounded like water spilling where it is supposed to. Rayon stood by the gate and welcomed people with a humility that was not a costume. When the light was the color of the tiles downstairs, and the air had learned how to smell like clean pages, a woman stood up and read a story about a house who refuses to remember the names of those who use her badly. The audience applauded, and the house, my house, kept some of that applause for itself. I could feel it. Later, after the last cup had been washed and my bones had reminded me I am not a young woman, but a woman who has survived her youth, Rayan kissed my head and said, "Thank you, Ma." "For what?" I asked. "Because people should say the names of their gratitude out loud now and then, for not teaching me a lesson," he said, "and teaching me anyway." I laughed. That lovely, ugly laugh that age gives you when it takes away things you don't miss. "Thank your father," I said. "You put the rules in the walls." And that is the surprise, really. The one I prepared and the one I hadn't. Meant to, that a house built by love knows how to protect itself. That paper can be kinder than men. That lemon tea tastes better when the sugar is your own. That sons grow at the speed of the questions you ask them, not the commands you bark. That when someone tells you you are not allowed to come, you can smile and nod and prepare a welcome they cannot step into without. Learning how to be the kind of person who deserves it. If you walk by Sea Glass House and put your ear to the fence, you might hear it, the sound a home makes when it remembers its own name. It sounds like a gate closing, like a book opening, and a woman laughing into her sleeve because the ending is not what the villains rehearsed for. It sounds like the clink of a cup being set gently on a saucer by someone whose hand does not shake. It sounds a little like the sea, asterisk, asterisk,